start the timer. I always forget that.
Okay, go.
Hi, I'm Diane McGarry with Dracut Arts.
And I'm Tom McGarry. Today we're privileged to have Grace Talusan and the Reverend Atula Jamir joining us. On Saturday, January 23rd at 2 p.m., author Grace Talusan will be joining Dracut Arts for our Winter Arts event. Grace was born in the Philippines and raised in New England. A graduate of Tufts University and the MFA program in writing at the University of California, Irvine, she is the recipient of a U.S. Fulbright Fellowship to the Philippines and an Artist Fellowship Award from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. Talusan teaches the SA Incubator at Grub Street and the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts. She is the Fannie Hurst Writer-in-Residence at Brandeis University for 2019 through 2021. And her book, The Body Papers, was winner of the Restless Books Prize for New Immigrant Writing, and that is her first book. Here to discuss some of the issues raised in this fantastic memoir with us is the Reverend Atula Jamir. She is the pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Lowell. She earned her PhD in constructive theology from Boston University and her STM from Yale Divinity School. Prior to serving at Calvary, Atula has taught in theological colleges in India. She finds strength and meaning in being present to others. So welcome.
Thank you. So good to be here.
So I believe we have some slides that we'll use through this discussion. And Grace, do you want to discuss the first slide when it comes up?
Sure. So this is the cover of my memoir, The Body Papers. And it came out with Restless Books in paperback in March and about a year ago in hardcover. And it's my first book. And I'll show you a few photos that were not in the book. And this is of my ancestral home in the Philippines. I immigrated to this country when I was 2 years old. And this is a picture of my relatives. I went to visit the Philippines in 2015 on a Fulbright, and these are some of the relatives in that ancestral home. And sadly, only a few of us are still living from that photograph. So I'm really glad we took it. So I thought I'd read an excerpt from the book, and I'll just start. Immigration is a kind of death. You leave one life for another one with no guarantee of seeing your loved ones or home again. So this is a picture of me and my two sisters. This is taken in the United States. We came to this country when I was 2, as I said. And one thing that my sisters and I share in common is that we all have the BRCA, or the breast and ovarian hereditary cancer mutation. And so I wanted to show a picture of us as well as read a little bit of the writing I did about that experience. This is the letter I got that said that I was BRCA positive. And this is an excerpt from the moment before I had my mastectomy. So I'll just read it. I'm just going to put something in to relax you. You might feel dizzy, the doctor said. I nodded. The woman crouched, slid a syringe from her pocket, and pushed the liquid into my hand. A moment later, I woke up shivering cold and desperate to pee. My voice was so soft it didn't reach the nurses working around me. I was afraid I might wet the bed. I just need the toilet one more time before surgery, I said. Next slide. A moment, oh, there's a repeat. Next slide. You're all done, the nurse said. You did great. We're going to take you up to your room in just a minute. But when will I have the surgery? I asked. And then I looked down at my chest and saw the bloody drains pinned to my gown and the white of the surgical bra strapped around me. I tried to sit up, but I was too sore. My body was a pain cage. In that moment, I lost my fear of death. About 6 hours had gone in a blink of an eye. It was that easy to be and not to be. And this is a picture of my sister after her surgery, and I'm walking beside her. They wanted us to get up and walk almost the same day, I think the same day as we had the surgery. And this is a photo from the Philippines that my husband Alonzo Nichols took at a church, and the garland you see is sampaguita flowers, which are a kind of jasmine. They're really fragrant.
Wow. It gives quite a sense of another, well, experience in another place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a moment to talk about that experience of death and things. Atula, you were addressing that the other day. I wondered if you could give us some insight into these.
Sure. Grace, your book, The Body Papers, a memoir, is a heart-rending story, the first of a kind that gripped my attention and took me on a journey. You had to endure the pain of having your country of birth as a child, all your childhood places becoming a memory, and your world is turned upside down when an irreparable injury is forced upon your body and emotions as a little girl by your own family, who should have been protecting and loving you, then facing the reality of racial discrimination. But the story continues. Cancer lurks in the dark to devour you, and you overcome this dreadful disease not without a big sacrifice. Your ability to bear children and the joys and challenges of nurturing and mothering your own. But this cannot be read just as a tragic story, a story of pain and loss, but a testimony of courage, goodness, grace, authenticity, and meaning making. While reading your book, when I thought that my tears have dried, another patch of tears welled up in the depth of my heart, giving way to quiet sobbing, tears of sadness and gratefulness. Thank you for being alive and strong to share this with the world. There's so many souls out there broken. You are touching and healing, and you will never know the limit of the impact you are having on people. I totally relate with your statement, immigration is a kind of death. When I first left for the US alone, my parents thought it would be the last time that they saw of me. There's this inexpressible pain of separation. It is not just a few hours flight, but it is a journey across the seas and oceans and mountains and hills. My parents could not fathom the distance, and it sure felt like a final goodbye. In 17 years, I was able to visit them twice. And when I left during my last visit home, my parents were brokenhearted. My dad is in his 90s and mom in her 80s. My dad kept watching the chopper I was on until the chopper disappeared beyond the hills. And it is uncertain that I'll be able to see them again, especially during these strange times ravaged by COVID-19. So immigration is surely a kind of death in that sense, which is very painful, which you have amazingly described in your book. And also the fear, we fear about everything. Immigrants are defined by papers and documents. You have mentioned that. These documents are the ones that protect us, validate, and confirm us. Without these papers, our life also faces another kind of death. Now, I hope you will share something about that and then connect it with another time in your story when you face death, but this time you lose the fear of death, as you read in the small clip there. So what was it like to lose the fear of death?
Well, sure. First of all, thank you so much for your careful and generous reading of my work. And it is such a gift for me to hear your response and to hear that really beautiful story that I really wanted to cry about that moment that stays with you of the last time you saw your parents and you're in this chopper going away from them. I mean, that's a story that will stay with me because, you know, we have lots of goodbyes with people. And I think everyone at this time can probably relate because of what's happening with the virus. You know, we don't know when we're going to see each other again. And maybe immigrants have had that experience more. We really don't know when we're going to see each other again. But I think people living in this country right now have that sense as well, that you didn't know it was going to be the last time you saw your friends and family and then had to go inside and not see them for you know, who knows how long. So there's so many ways that we can have empathy for each other and sympathy for what each other is going through collectively right now. And as to your question about death, and if, you know, someone could trace just that theme throughout the work and the different like symbolic deaths, like the death of my hope and wish to be a mother, for example, the death of different kinds of lives that I would have lived if I had made different choices, or if my parents had made different choices, or if people had not been allowed access to my life, how different I would have been. So there's a way that I've been constantly negotiating and thinking about these other lives that I would have lived if only something didn't happen. And so all those lives that I didn't live, in a way, I sort of grieved those deaths. Like I didn't get to live, you know, this life if I had gone to this school or married this person or lived in this part of the country. You know, in a way, those are like practice deaths and practice with loss and grief. And so that moment that you described when I woke up from my surgery, people told me later that they had come to the hospital and sat for hours and visited with my family and brought food. And they told me about all these things that they had done. And that time for me, I was under anesthesia for I think 8 hours having surgery and reconstruction. And there was a way that I just wasn't here anymore. I don't know where my conscious mind went. I mean, it was meant to be protected from the surgery and the trauma of what was happening. But when I woke up, I really had this sense of like, oh, wow, life goes on without me, you know, and if fear of death meant being afraid of how the people who loved me would feel, or I don't know, I felt like, okay, they would be sad, but I also know that life goes on. Also, even like with the saddest things in our life, that's the thing about life, is it goes on. And I think having faith traditions or having strong relationships with people help us cope with that, because life does go on. And that is like the beauty and also the cruelty of it, when all of us are experiencing, you know, we might be having a regular day and someone we go by who's maybe grouchy or even doing something kind of dangerous in their car, and we're mad at them. You know, maybe they just had like the worst day of their life. Maybe they got the worst news that they never expected to get. And so if there's a way that we can try to find compassion for what each other is going through and, you know, choose that, I think that's, I don't know, that's something that experience of like, of not fearing death kind of taught me, is this constant awareness that, you know, we try to put it out of our mind, but you know, that is the reality, the thing that all of us humans have in common. So this is an excerpt from a part of the book that talks about my experience as a new immigrant. And I grew up in a small New England town that was mostly white. They accepted my family, and yet there would be moments of racial microaggression. And in this case, we had a church that we belonged to my whole life. And this was a moment where a racial microaggression happened in church, which was like a very intimate, private, very personal space. It's where people are worshiping. So I'll read an excerpt from there. A person did not even need to use that word, Oriental, for me to feel that very particular kind of humiliation, shame, and diminishment that comes with racism. As Catholic Filipinos, we attended Sunday Mass faithfully every week, which sometimes meant sitting behind a white family whose small children would turn around in the pew to stare at us, then pull back the corners of their eyes. My family ignored them. We pretended, even to each other, that we didn't see them asserting their power. These children could barely speak, they were so young, but they already knew how to communicate their whiteness. They knew what fun it was. And this is a picture of my extended family at the church that we used to go to. And it's my communion day. I'm at the bottom of the statue of Our Lady, and I'm wearing white. And this is me with my husband, and we're in the Philippines at a resort. So we spent 6 months in the Philippines, and I'm going to read an excerpt about how my husband experienced race as a Black African-American man in the Philippines. My husband wants to stay in the Philippines because for the first time he feels the weight of racism lifted from his shoulders. He has not fully realized how heavy and pervasive the burden of living as a Black man in America is until he is in Manila and gets some relief from carrying it. In the Philippines, Alonzo is read as American, and this affords him all kinds of benefits and privileges that he has never enjoyed before. He says that being American in the Philippines is what being famous must be like, what it is like to be white. People are always so happy to see him.
It's so sad that children learn to communicate their whiteness or privilege at a very young age. They learn to discriminate, categorize, dominate, and harass. Just because someone looks different, they are regarded as the other, the outsider, the exotic, everything that entails the word Orientalism. The vicious cycle continues, which we must break. I was so touched by the clip about your husband's experience in Manila. Your husband, who is Black, felt the weight of racism come off his shoulders and got some relief from carrying it for so long. This is such a powerful awakening to look deeper into the experience of an American in his or her own country. It is a sad narrative to hear that one is relieved from the burden of racism in a foreign country among strangers rather than in their own country among their own people. A Black man comparing what it is like to be white in America to the treatment a Black man received in another country, in this case, the Philippines, because he's American, is remarkable. There is so much to unpack and unlearn here. Where do we start? Where can we start?
I mean, I think being the awareness, like even my husband, of course, he's lived with racism his whole life. He grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, where, as we know, that's where the Breonna Taylor killing happened, and people have been protesting since that has happened. And I mean, he's lived with it his whole life, he's aware of it, and yet even he was surprised when he went to another country and felt that weight lift. So I think awareness is very important, and that's just only step one, is like, what does it mean to live with these racialized identities, and how can we pay attention? And for some of us, it's not convenient or pleasant to pay attention. It's scary, actually, to think about, because we've been told, the myth of meritocracy, we've been told about how great our country is, And I do think our country is great, but I think that we're great enough to hear the whole story. And I think we're stronger when we know the truth, and we can take in the truths about ourselves, but also our country, and, you know, make amends, do something with it, learn how to, you know, be aware and think about how we want to be in the world based on that information. And so, you know, it might be a painful process for people to pay attention to how race plays out in the world. But if we all want the same thing, which is an equal and just world and everyone to have an opportunity, this is the kind of work that we can do together. And I think the most powerful work happens in close relationships, friendships, in places like churches, in arts communities, in families, parents, children, you know, teachers, students. I think, you know, in relationships like that, really powerful work can happen.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yes. I'm so sorry that you had to experience that in your church when you were a little girl.
Thank you.
But as a pastor of a church, I can say that church is not just a group of people who gather and listen to the preacher. It is a family where we care for one another. We welcome, love, and embrace one another and make sure that every member of the family is doing well. I believe that church is an important platform to talk about racial relations, to address the negative racial attitudes, and pave the path of substantive change. This change aligns with our longing for a peaceful, just, and flourishing world. So I believe we also need to be willing to have difficult and uncomfortable conversations with friends and family and neighbors, even strangers we meet along the way. And also better education is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I teach, and I teach writing, and I don't teach content that necessarily has to do with race and social justice and inequality, and yet that's the kind of content I'm drawn towards, and I'm very certain about the way I approach teaching writing. Like, writing is powerful, storytelling is powerful, and if people can learn to change hearts and minds through these kinds of narratives, I think that can be really important. And, you know, there are folks folks on all different, who have all kinds of agendas, do it already. Like, I'm very invested in the truth, and I think there are ways to find out what is factually accurate, and things like that, and I try to teach those things. But, you know, I do, like you said about the church being a kind of family, we have these like smaller communities and families, and that can spread out to bigger ones, like this larger family or this larger identity or project of the US or America, or, you know, thinking of worldwide. Like, I think we could start small in these communities where we can grow, these places that we have to have a lot of trust, because I think to make change and transform, we need to be able to trust each other, that we're not out to hurt each other, but we want to learn and educate, and we come towards each other with compassion and not judgment. And, you know, we're not trying to humiliate anybody or anything like that, or judge people, but we really want to learn. But I think that also means contending with difficult feelings too.
It can be very difficult. My ancestors were Italian Americans that came to this country, and when they went to church, they weren't allowed because they were Italian American, and it was an Irish Catholic neighborhood. There were just a few Italian Catholics moving in, and I remember the story that my grandmother's husband died. She had 10 kids, couldn't speak English very well, but the children translated for her all the time. And the priest didn't come. No one would console her. And this Protestant minister came by and he embraced the family and helped her take care of everything. So the whole family converted because there was community and there was support and there was health. My grandfather became an Episcopal because that's where he could get his naturalization. That's where he went to learn about the Constitution and the history of the country and move forward. You know, we forget the importance of these little things that aren't so little. You know, I mean, where do you get food? Where do you go for shelter? It's so, so important. And for some reason, we leave that out. I don't know.
And Diane, I think by sharing your story, that's an example of how we can find ways to relate. You don't even have to go back very far to find how your, immigrant relatives were treated. And there's this way that, there's this famous book called How the Irish Became White, but this notion about whiteness and who becomes white, it's really a way about talking about who becomes privileged or who is accepted. But it's not that long ago that Italians and Irish, for that matter, were very much discriminated against and were not white for a time.
Well, it's interesting. That's not the end of the story, because one of those 10 children, ran for congressman in New Jersey. And people were like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you Catholic? You're Italian, you should be Catholic. And he couldn't say the truth. You're talking about truth. He said, well, my family went through France, which was true, but we were converted by the Huguenots. And then it was okay because it was generations before. But he couldn't say the truth, which was my family was rejected when we came here.
Yeah. Well, Grace, your book is a tool for us to tell our stories. And this helps us to recognize the beauty and mystery of our deep interconnectedness, no matter who we are and where we come from.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that. I mean, and to hear it coming from you means so much. Like when because we grew up Catholic, I was in the church every week and then sometimes more than once a week. And when I think about it, I think my love of words comes from being read to. I mean, being like in Mass, we were read to every week, and we were read from the Bible and a different apostle every year. Just, I don't know, there's this way that I know that my life in the church was foundational to me loving stories and words and language and the power of storytelling, and to hear that my work and my stories may be instructive and useful and even company for readers is such a big compliment to me. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you both so much. We're near the end of our time for today, so I just want to thank you both for joining us and giving us your stories. As you say, stories are very important. So, like I said, we're out of time. So thank you again. And I hope whoever sees this can join us on Saturday, January 23rd at 2 p.m. for a live Zoom authors reading with Grace Talusan. This will be followed by a performance by harpist Pamela Storer at 4 o'clock. And for more information, please go to our website, which is dracutarts.com. And thank you both so much again.
Thank you so much. You are incredible women. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Atula, Tom, Diane, and Dracut Arts. This was really a treat. Thank you so much.